So this idea of relative value relative to risk became indoctrinated in me. Once you start with that as a framework, then you start to look at real estate as kind of a matrix of risk. Well, today, I believe that the equivalent of the U.S. Treasury in real estate is multifamily. If I were to advise somebody today, what should I do with my real estate allocation? I would say 100% of multifamily. You're not getting paid enough to go away from the risk-free.
This is your Real Estate Syndication Show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, our guest is Ethan Penner. You've probably heard of him. Right now, he's the CEO of Mosaic Real Estate Investors. He's a leader in the U.S. real estate finance industry for 30 plus years. He's credited with being the primary driver in the creation of the commercial mortgage-backed securities market in the 1990s. He's been in this industry a long time, named in 2011 by Real Estate Forum as one of the industry's 65 living legends. A number of other things that, he has done in our industry, but he's also the author of Greatness is a Choice. And so I encourage you to look that up. You're going to hear him talk about that a little bit today. He has a very interesting background and so much insight. Ethan, welcome to the show. Honored to have you on.
It's really, really nice to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I've been learning more about you, just preparing a little bit. I'm excited about the conversation and just your experience and even a book that you wrote. I know that we're gonna touch on as well. I'm looking forward to that conversation. But before we do, give the listeners just a little bit about your path to Wall Street. I think there's a number of things there that's very unique and has helped probably shape, obviously, who you are and just what you believe and different things. I think that would be helpful.
Well, that could be a whole book and a number of podcasts, but I'll try to summarize it because, yes, as you suggest, it was an unusual path. I was born in I don't want to say poverty, but, because we like to say middle class, but I think middle class is a fancy word for many people for kind of poorer than middle class. I think I was poorer than middle class, but I was lucky in the sense that I had a very good education. So somehow I was able to go to a private school that was very expensive on a scholarship, and that gave me what looked like a middle class childhood. But other than that, it was below middle class economically. I have a lot of blessings. We tend to view what we call misfortune as misfortune, and I kind of see things as everything's a blessing, right? There's no bad or better or worse paths. I think that challenges with a positive attitude are what prepare us to succeed in life, and they're gifts in a certain sense. So the hunger and ambition that I think derived from my childhood and an understanding of how much of the world lives, which is, a paycheck to paycheck existence with no savings and no safety net. I think it's made me the person that I am today. And I wouldn't trade it for the world, and I have to tell you, I was aware of that even as a young man, as a child, because my mother really was a great teacher and a great parent. So I started at the very bottom. I went to college on scholarship and financial aid, and I graduated with a finance major in the middle of a very deep recession. And when you think about recessions, we look at today and we bemoan the fact that interest rates are 4.5% or 4% on the 10-year. And we go, wow, times are tough. When I graduated college, the 10-year was yielding about 16%. Okay, so you think about how tough the economy is when yields are on treasuries approaching 16%. It was tough. And I got a job. I was lucky to even get a job in finance, but I got a job at a college at a very small savings and loan, very unsophisticated. It was basically a home mortgage lending business disguised in a bank format. It was very small. And I was the low man on the totem pole. So if you had a hierarchy of jobs in finance, I think I had the lowest job in the world in finance or in the United States. And somehow by, I don't know, good fortune, ambition, certain skills that I developed of being aware and and going forward and understanding human nature. Within 4 years of that day, I was at Drexel running $1 billion business as one of the earliest mortgage-backed securities traders. And then within 10 years of that first day, I was probably the highest paid or among the couple highest paid people on Wall Street and had that perch for a number of years in the 90s. And so I had this amazing ascension and, credited with, and I think correctly so, having created the commercial mortgage-backed securities industry. And that's kind of my kind of financial claim to fame or contribution to the world of finance. And I'm proud of that. I think that bringing that capital markets to the commercial real estate industry has been a big benefit to a lot of, thousands of people that are professionals in and around that industry because it created a steady supply of capital in a world that had been dependent upon the vagaries of regulators and regulated financial companies.
Yeah. Now, one thing you mentioned there was the hunger and ambition you said came from your childhood. What do you think that was exactly during your childhood that helped kind of shake that hunger and ambition? And I think it even showed in what you said there. In like 5 years, you had advanced this much. In 10 years, you had advanced this much, and then you even on to much bigger things as well, like you mentioned. But what was that in your childhood? You think that did that?
Poverty and the hunger born from poverty and a knowledge that there's no safety net for me. So, if you know that you have to make money to eat dinner that night or to have shelter, you don't really think, gee, am I happy in this job? You just go and kick ass no matter what the job is. And I think that's as a gift to have that clarity of purpose. I think that if you're born with some means, it clouds your commitment to your daily job, right? You go like, gee, am I happy here? Should I be doing this today? And all those questions undermine the bring it hard, kicking ass attitude that is required to be usually successful. So I didn't have any lack of clarity on that. The second thing is because a lot of people are born into challenging financial circumstances and they don't make something great of themselves. And I think what kind of the combination, because it's not just that. I was gifted with parents, albeit divorced parents who really didn't talk to each other, even when they were married, the brief period they were married. But I was gifted with both parents teaching me that nobody's better than me. They both taught me that message that if it could be done, you could do it. And I guess I believe them, and so I was never daunted by challenge and I never believed anybody was better than me. And I think so that combination of belief in oneself and hunger, I think was the combination that I leaned on to achieve whatever I've achieved.
Great answer. I love the no safety net too example, right? You have nothing to lose. So why not go kick the door down?
I
Right.
mean, I had no choice, actually.
Yeah. You've witnessed obviously multiple cycles in real estate finance, to say the least. And I just wonder, like, what current trends you're seeing, or challenges that remind you of past cycles, as well, or maybe advice you give to current passive investors, just with what you know of today compared to recent.
I had the great good fortune of growing up on the bond trading desk. So when I left the savings and loan industry after 3 years of what I call my own MBA, right? That was really my version of an MBA. I ended up on Wall Street as one of the early mortgage-backed securities traders. I was at Drexel, which was the Mike Milken years, which was the best firm ever on Wall Street, I think, and spawned many, many hugely successful people from that vintage of from Drexel. I learned on a trading desk, bond trading desk, things that you can't learn anywhere else. And it became a part of my subconscious as I look at the world. And I'll share one of them with you is this notion that of relative value. So in bonds, everything trades off of the government equivalent because that's the risk-free rate. And so you understand deeply relative value and how everything has to make sense off of the risk-free rate based on risk, right? So if the 10-year treasury is yielding 4, just as an example, and you were going to make a 10-year investment in a anything but the 10-year treasury, you would have to be paid a higher yield than 4 for it to make sense, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. And so this idea of relative value relative to risk became indoctrinated in me. I don't think that concept is as indoctrinated in the average investor or real estate professional as it should be. And so I would start with that. And once you start with that as a framework, then you start to look at real estate as kind of a matrix of risk, right? So you say, okay, well, if I'm investing in real estate equity, just so it's real estate, but I just want to be clear, equity, you have your property types as your first cut of risk. Well, today, I believe that there is the equivalent of the US Treasury in real estate is multifamily, right? So multifamily to me is the risk-free, if you will, kind of benchmark for everything. And I think everything else in real estate should trade off of that. Now, people might make an argument for data centers as being a very safe investment, but I would challenge that and say that you need to really appreciate and understand technology, which is ever changing, and energy, which is of questionable. No one really understands the energy supply and will it meet the demand. So data centers to me are considerably riskier than multifamilies. And then the other one would be self storage, as probably the one that I would say is closest. So if I were going to create, just like you have in bonds, you have U.S. Treasuries, then you have triple A's and double A's and single A's, and you kind of go down the hierarchy. And with each grade lower, the yield has to be higher. Okay. And I think that's the way I would look at real estate. I would say multifamilies are the treasury equivalent. And whatever their cap rate or yield expectations are, that ought to be the lowest. And then you've got behind that probably self storage or storage. And then not self storage, but warehouse, industrial warehouse. And then you might have self storage. And then you might have things like data centers, and then you might have things like grocery anchored retail. And you kind of go down the list, and we could all agree or disagree which is the equivalent of the double A and the single A and the triple B and so on. But that's how I look at real estate. And the next thing I do, which is also done in the bond market, is how much premium do I need to get paid to go down to that next notch, right? What's a fair amount? And if I'm getting paid more than that fair amount, I go down the notch. If I'm getting paid less than that fair amount, I'm not going to go down a notch. So, for example, triple A's have historically traded in CMBS land on average about 70. I'm going to make this number up, 70 wider than the treasury equivalent. And that means that if you buy them at 100 over, you might buy them, right? And if they're going at 40 over, you might not buy them, right? And that's how you should think about real estate too. Now, the answer though is, of course, if they're going at 100 over versus 40 over, you have to ask yourself, is there a reason they're trading wide to their historical average, right? Is 100 over, it sounds good, but maybe there are some reasons. Maybe the chances of loss are higher even for triple A's than they have been historically. And so it's not simply measuring against the historical average, but also that moment in time. And that's very important. So I think today is a time where there are more uncertainties, right? And uncertainties are just another word for risk. There are more uncertainties in the world, and I think most people would agree, than perhaps there ever have been. Today's election day, so it's fitting that we say that. Because my God, it's pretty daunting when we think about the uncertainties that will emanate from the decision that the United States electorate makes today about who to elect as president and what that means for everything, right? Literally everything. So everything that we're going to say today may be undone or rendered irrelevant by the time this thing goes to be listened to a month or so from now. But that's a good point of uncertainty. And even if, by the way, hopefully a month from now, we'll know who the president is, right?
I hope we do anyway.
I hope we know today, but Matt, I hope it's not still a lingering question a month from now. That would be an unbelievable disaster. But that goes to this whole idea of we're living in risky or uncertain times, because when I was growing up, you never went to bed on election night not knowing who won. Never. Okay. And all of a sudden, now we expect kind of a week to pass and court cases to be heard about challenges in different states that can't seem with all the technology to count ballots correctly. It's weird. So even that uncertainty adds to the kind of risk premium that one needs to be paid to go away from the risk-free investment. So if I consider in the world of real estate, multifamilies to be the risk-free investment, then I feel like today, every grade down from there, I need to get paid way more than I've ever been paid in order to go away from the risk-free. And if you look at where things trade today, it's not worth it. You're not getting paid enough to go away from multifamily. So if I were to advise somebody today, what should I do with my real estate allocation? I would say 100% of multifamily. You're not getting paid enough to go away from the risk free.
Yeah, I thought I had read recently that you had like a focus on apartment ownership, and even thinking through like, the why we believe that, or why you believe that, right? And you talked about the uncertainties and whatnot. You mentioned the election, which we did. We vote today, just so the listeners know. But we don't know the outcome just yet. But any thoughts on which way the election goes and how that's going to affect the multifamily sector or investors that are investing today?
That's the beauty of multifamily. The beauty of multifamily is, and that's why I call it the equivalent of the risk free investment in real estate, because in good times and bad, in inflation and deflation, people still need to rent apartments. There's a gigantic supply demand imbalance for apartments. So that only makes it even better and safer. I think that in we definitely face, I feel, greater than average inflation risk over the coming decade, regardless of who wins the election, because it's informed by our deficit and our debt. So I think that regardless of who wins, we still are facing a $35 trillion headline government debt. And the only way out of that is currency debasement, which is inflation, right? So I feel like inflation is almost guaranteed for a variety of reasons, regardless of who wins. And apartments really uniquely do well. Short term, they're short term leases. And I think in inflationary times, people's compensation will ultimately be kept up with inflation. There's usually a lag. Costs tend to go up before wages, but wages always catch up. They have to. Otherwise, no one could sell. There's no buyers for goods at a higher price unless wages go up. So I feel pretty good about apartments in any event. And that's why I love apartments. And I think why the spread between apartments and everything else should be wider than it's ever been. I have my thoughts like every other American and probably every other citizen of the world who's paying attention has about this election. We could talk about it. We're sure to alienate a fairly significant percentage of your audience. I don't know if it'll be 50%, but if we did talk about it, we might piss a few people off. But I think one of the things I would say is this: I will never say anything without having logic to back it up. So if I said something to you in answer to that question or any other question, I have my logic to back it up, and I'm open to being challenged. Like I like being challenged. I like people to say, well, you know what? I heard your logic and I heard your opinion. I disagree, and here's why. What I don't appreciate is a response is, I heard your opinion and I heard your logic and I disagree, and I actually have no reasons why. Okay. That's not, I don't respect that. And unfortunately, we hear a lot of that in today's political discourse. We hear a lot of people who have very firmly held opinions, but no logic to back it up at all. And they're very emotional about it. It's mostly emotion and not rationale. I'm from the Ayn Rand, everything has to make sense world. And if you can't make sense of yourself and your own opinions, go back to a quiet room and think things through and write them down on a piece of paper until you figure it out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that greatly because most won't have the logic, or they won't be willing to listen to someone else's. Like you said, I'm willing to hear somebody else's logic and talk through that, but oftentimes they're not.
I also put out there, Whitney, I send out for your listeners, I send out what I call Friday Five, which is five observations. And it's a short Each of the observations is typically 2 or 3 sentences at most, with a kind of companion video that is a 1 3 minute video of me expanding upon the point. And I send that out to, I don't know, probably 10,000 people every other Friday, because I don't want to be every Friday, because I don't think anyone has that much worthy things to share with everyone. So I do it every other Friday. And if your listeners are interested in that, they could go on www.greatintersection.com and sign up for that Friday 5.
Awesome. Yeah, I would encourage them to do that. I'll do it myself. Uh, Ethan, I know you've mentioned a like a rinse and repeat, say, strategy to create wealth. Can you maybe elaborate on that philosophy a little bit, and just even in markets, like we're in now?
As far as what do you mean specifically?
Well, I just the philosophy behind the say rinse and repeat model. I think I've heard you mention that in a different interview.
I think that's in the business of building and running a business. I say that in that context, right? So I have observed in my career that there are creative types. I think I consider myself to be one of those types. I get my kicks out of creating something new that has not been done before. It's fun for me. And I like building businesses. I really love that. But what I've observed is that the people who really do well are the people who have the high threshold for repetition. So they take a business built by somebody like me, and then they just run it really well for decades. Generally, the artist or the creative type doesn't have that high threshold for repetition. It's not common for someone to have both. I got to know a number of musical artists well in my career, Don Henley of the Eagles being one of them. And, we were talking one day, and I was observing how, and asking him really, how does it feel to play Hotel California and all those hits literally every day? And how does he do it with the same energy and passion for what now is about 50 years? It's kind of crazy. I thought, gee, I know I would hate that song by now if I were him, and all of my songs. You know what I mean? And he said the high threshold for repetition has been obviously one of the keys of his success. I look at myself and say the absence of that threshold for repetition has been one of the keys of my not having accumulated the massive amount of wealth that might have come my way had I had that one attribute. So I suppose you could work on that. First, you need to be aware that you don't have it. I think that in the moments that I was younger, I wasn't aware that I didn't have it. I wasn't aware how important it was. And now, as I reflect as a older man with a lot of experience, and maybe I can share that to the benefit of younger people who are thinking about their careers, cultivating that threshold for repetition. If accumulating wealth is your goal, I would say that would be a very, very key thing to cultivate within yourself.
That's interesting. Interesting the dialogue with him as well about Hotel California. I mean, we've all heard that song so long, so many times. But you see him play it, or if you've seen it in more recent years, there's still a lot of energy behind it.
Oh man, he plays it like it's a new song. And I actually can never go to another concert of his. I've heard it too many times, but I have such a little threshold for repetition, I can't even hear it anymore.
Speak to that. The thought process behind how you would pick the thing that's worthy of that kind of repetition.
I think it's a very personal thing, right? I think that for some, it's love of that thing. For others, it's love of the reward of that thing, right? So I think with Don, I think Don loves money and fame and success. And I think that love of the kind of rewards of repetition are what drive Don. There are other people who love whatever it is they do, whatever it is they do. And they love that action, or they love the contribution they're making, or whatever it is, and I don't want to characterize Don in that way only. He may actually love the joy he's bringing to the listeners at his concerts, and I think he probably does. So it's a combination of things, and the weight of those things, I think, dependent upon the individual in that situation.
I want us to make sure we have time to discuss it. So I want to go ahead and get to your book that you wrote, and greatness is a choice, and maybe speak to what prompted to write a book like this, and then let's dive into some of the things that a listener would get out of it as well.
I've always had in my mind the idea that having a family heirloom that can be passed down generationally is a really cool idea. And I thought if I had something that was 5 or 10 generations old in my family, the writings of an ancestor and their reflections upon their life from their time, it would be my most treasured asset, right? I mean, I would love that. Who wouldn't, right? And so I thought, well, I don't have that. Nobody in my family did that, but I could do that, right? And in 5 or 10 generations after me, my descendants can have that. So why not? And I think it's a nice thing to do. So I've always thought about that. And that's always been in my mind. And I've always used my phone, the notes section of my iPhone, as a place where I take notes. And I would start to take notes about observations I had. That's why I have my Friday Five, which is my observations. And I use that note section as an accumulation of observations I have daily. And so when I have to film my Friday Five videos or write them down, they're there. I have an abundance of them in my notes. But one day, it was mid December 2020, I guess 2021, I was sitting around and it was COVID, having breakfast with my daughter, and who was a senior in high school but not go to school because of COVID. And it was 10 days before Christmas. And she said, what am I getting? There was a small Christmas gathering. It was only my brother-in-law and his family was coming over. And she asked me, what am I buying for them for Christmas? And most of them were adults. And I told her, well, she knew I don't like buying gifts for adults and I don't like receiving gifts. I like giving gifts to kids. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to write a book and give them my book. I had a little expletive before the word book as I responded to her too, and she said, well, it's 10 days before Christmas. When are you going to write the book? And I said, I'm going to write it right now. And so she laughed. And by the time she came back to the breakfast table 4 hours later, I said, I think I've written the book. And she couldn't believe it. And most of what ended up being a published book by Wiley, which was the oldest publishing house in America, was written in 4 hours at the breakfast table that day with that kind of mindset. And I was able to look in my notes and get prompted from the ideas that I had been, jotting down for a long time. So it kind of came pretty easily to me. That first version I printed 100 copies because no printer would print less than 100 copies. So I way more than I needed for Christmas purposes. And I started giving them out. And the feedback I got was extremely encouraging from people who read it. And most impactfully for me, shared it with their kids, their teenage kids. And I thought, as I reflected, I thought, these are like philosophies born out of my life. And my life was, I'm a baby boomer. I was born in the 60s. And the world I lived in and grew up in and the ethics that were part of my culture, everyday culture, whether it be TV shows I watched or messages I got through my education system, are far different than what is being delivered and has been being delivered to young people in the world in America the last 2 or 3 decades at least. We tend to take this for granted. We tend to think that our kids are off to school and learning kind of some version of what we learned in the 70s or whatever. And they're not. They're really not. And that gulf of what is being taught between generations is a big problem, I think. And so my book, I realized, could help fill that gap, fill the gulf, right? And I thought, gee, my book is being read by parents with their children and given to children who are enjoying it. And I thought, that is really cool. And so I sat down, I rewrote the book a bit for an audience that I thought would be broader than my own family. And that ended up hitting the eyes of a publishing house, and that's the rest is history. You could actually buy the audio version. I'm the narrator, and so you could, listen to me read the book to you if that's how you like to get the information.
I always like hearing the author read the book, the actual author, but I think you have a focus on like learning from challenges. as well, right? And maybe speak to a challenge that you had to help shape your direction as well.
Well, I mean, obviously, as I mentioned, the financial need was a big challenge. And I think you're right, Whitney. I think that we all get one of the things I've learned is every single person has a life filled with challenges. That's the common theme of life on earth for every single person. I've lived a very interesting and very different kind of life in the sense that I've physically experienced what I would call the feeling of poverty, the feeling of no savings in a family and paycheck to paycheck existence. I know what that's like. I lived that way. I lived amongst people and grew up amongst people who live that way. And then as I had this kind of extraordinary run on Wall Street, I found myself in the homes of and befriending the richest people in the world. I don't think many people have seen what I've seen, and had the walk I've walked. And one of the things that I think I would share with every single one of your listeners and dispel this notion that I think a lot of people have is that money solves problems. And it does, of course, right? I mean, the problem of subsistence and worrying about and being distracted by just survival, right? That's what money does solve for. But again, the flip side of that, even that is having the inspiration of the need to survive is what made me kind of the young success that it made me. So it's not really a terrible thing. It just feels terrible in the moment, right? But anyhow, I do agree that it's better to have than not have. But what I learned is that rich people and really rich people have huge problems. And the problems they have, I think, I'm sad to say this on their behalf, are far, far more problematic than the problems that I see poorer people have. The neighborhood I grew up in was a neighborhood that had, again, no money. But I think that we all had a good time every day. The level of fun that is available in that kind of a lifestyle is far purer and more obvious than the level of fun to people in affluent situations. The level of relationships and the truth born in relationships where there's no ulterior motives. No one's after you for your money if you have no money. Okay. But God, if you have a lot of money and you're known as someone who has a lot of money, how do you trust the purity of any overture? Right. And you really have a hard time. It undermines everything your family, your friendships, your business relationships. You're on guard all the time. Right. And so, anyhow, my point is challenges are part of life. And in summary, to answer your question and bring it all home, everyone gets challenges. Some people meet their unique challenges in a positive way, and the challenges inspire them to be better. The majority of people fold. The majority of people get the punch in the nose from the challenge and they're knocked out, and that's the end of the fight. Okay. And I think that as long as you don't allow yourself to get knocked out, the fight's not over. You can get up from any punch in the nose, no matter how hard it is. And you could be inspired by that punch to bring it harder and harder and smarter and get better from that punch. And we're all going to get punched all the time because that's life.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The punch is coming.
And so
Right.
I tell my kids, yes, you can be sure of everyone you know is going to be suffering, and everyone, including you, and everyone you know is going to die, including you. That's the only thing you could really be sure of. So get ready. It's all coming.
Yeah, I know you have a big focus on like the U.S. education as well, right? Or reforming just different things around that, and maybe speak to that passion as well. And maybe it's linked here to what you're talking about.
Well, I mean, my book is my own kind of attempt to help bring ideas, educate, if you will, people to thinking differently and challenging themselves. I believe, my parents were both educators, so it's kind of in my DNA, it seems. And in my career, because I was always a pioneering person in everything I've done, because I like that, it's fun for me. I've always found myself teaching, right? So if I was creating commercial mortgage-backed securities, I had to first teach bond buyers how to underwrite real estate risk and how to think about it before they would consider buying it. I had to go to work with rating agencies, professionals who had never considered rating a real estate backed bond and teach them. So teaching has been a big part of my career. And for the last 10 years, I've had the joy of teaching a class in business school, first at USC and then at Pepperdine, at least one class a year typically, and for a semester or a session or whatever it is. So there's a quartile or a trimester. But I love to teach. And I think that's what leadership should be. Unfortunately, it's not, right? If we look at our political leaders, the best ones in history bring us along, right? They show us a light that we might not have seen and a roadmap to getting there. That's teaching, right? We don't have and haven't had for a while teachers in leadership roles. And I think we should aspire for that.
It's a gift to be able to teach, right? Or the ability.
So I find, by the way, when I teach, I also learn because I don't presume that everything I'm saying is 100% on the on the money. Nobody is right all the time, and I know I'm not. So, but by teaching and sharing my ideas, even in like a business school class, I always tell my students, feel free to interrupt me and challenge me, right? Because maybe there's something that that you can teach me that repositions how I think about things. And so I share my opinions or my beliefs, but I also share the underlying logic or rationale for it. And then I invite challenge. And I do that with my Friday Five. It's all an extension of that whole theme of I want to get better. And the only way I can get better and refine my ideas is share them with a broad audience and invite challenges and feedback.
There's a humility there that I think is very like crucial to being able to be teachable, right?
I think humility is, for me at least, born from a belief that I'm only alive to learn and grow. So I'm hungry for that. I'm hungry to learn and grow. And the best way to learn and grow is to be open to other people pushing back on your BS. I'm most offended by the lack of humility in people's opinions and by the certainty that they articulate. I have a friend in particular who I really love. He's a good guy. He has a good heart. I've known him for probably a decade. We've developed a nice friendship born out of a business relationship. And he literally sometimes falls into just calling me very hostile names, because I have a different political opinion than him. I mean, I'm aghast. And, he's judging me so harshly. And I have to say to him, like, man, your level of certainty is weird, actually. It's kind of weird. How could anyone be so certain? It really is that democratic, right? I think that foundational to me about our beautiful democracy is not right or wrong. It's need being expressed, right? So a poor person is crying out with need to solve their needs that a rich person might not even begin to understand, let alone anticipate. The rich person is crying out with his or her need, right? And the poor person can't anticipate or understand that need. And so the democracy is the coming together of disparate needs and then listening to each other and finding which needs are not being met in a minimally satisfactory way and making sure that our country can address them. To me, there's not a right or wrong on a lot of these issues like taxation and such. Although maybe I do have an opinion about that. But this lack of respect for the needs being articulated by disparate people is troubling to me.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a misunderstanding of what democracy is.
All right, Ethan, a few final questions, or we just have a few minutes left. But what's your best advice today for passive investors?
Load up on apartments. And that's my best advice. And I mean, I think apartments are the single best investment you can make. If you ask me for the second best investment, it would be commodities. I think oil. I think food stuff. I think water. Things that are needed to live. They're going to be great investments over a long period of time, and they'll perform very well even in an inflationary situation.
Is now a good time?
I don't think it's ever a bad time. You might have a moment that you go, gee, I'm down. I wish I had waited, but I think every investor should be thinking long term, at least 2 to 3 years, and probably more like 5 to 10. And I think those investments, I think apartments and I think resources are the ones that are going to perform the best.
What are some of the most important metrics that you track? Could be personally or professionally.
Well, I think the interest rates are the number one. I mean, I think that the level of debt would be number 1A. I think they kind of go hand in hand. So those two things are critically important. I'm a very conservative person. And so it would take a lot to get me to give you a different answer than apartments and resources. Like other things would have to be screamingly cheap, or I would have to be really believing that a boom is coming. So take my advice with that kind of that caveat. I'm a generally very conservative person. When they think about wealth accumulation, they should think about working and essentially trading their time and energy and creativity for their wealth creation. And I think they should view their investments as safe havens to protect their money against loss, which includes inflation. Like inflation is a loss. Okay. So if you earned 4% and prices of things went up by 5%, you lost principal. Okay. On an inflation adjusted basis, you lost money. You didn't make 4%, you lost 1%. After inflation, principal safety should be everyone's paramount objective when investing. And they should invest their lives to create kind of their nest egg and their wealth, and then invest to protect that.
What are some just daily habits that you're disciplined about that have produced the biggest reward for you?
By far and away, prayer. So I discovered daily prayer about 6 or so years ago. It took me a long time. And I came up with I have my own prayer ritual that comes out of the Jewish prayer book. I was raised in the Jewish faith. And I actually am writing my second book, and it's about my prayer ritual and explaining it and sharing it, if you will. And I feel like my daily prayer has calmed me, has made me a way different human being. And what I get out of prayer that's special is that it sets me up with the right mental state to harvest the best possible outcomes for my day. It makes me appreciative, which is obviously a great state of mind. It makes me aware, which makes me a great state of mind. And it sets me up with specific character qualities that I want to embrace within myself and show the world every day. Yeah, I think if you do those things, your day is a beautiful day. And so it's been that way for me. And I think that it's my number one, and I don't even know what the number two ritual would be after that.
Wow. I appreciate you saying that in a big way. I feel like the Lord's just impressing on me more lately to pray more.
Prayer is way more than we think it is. It really is, and you can't know it until you actually give up and do it, right? And it's not, by the way, it's not meditation. So, like, I think meditation, where you're sitting around in silence, is a different thing because it doesn't achieve the objectives I just said I aim to achieve with my prayer ritual every day. It's a different thing. It's a calming thing. And I don't mean to denigrate meditation, but it's not a substitute for prayer.
I appreciate you saying that as well. I would definitely say they're very different things, to say the least. And maybe that you just mentioned it, but the number one thing that's contributed to your success.
Well, success is a funny thing. So I have to first define success in order to answer that question. I would not define success as money, and I would not define success as renown or external admiration. I would define success as how am I proud with the human being that I present myself as every day, and am I pleased with the integrity that I brought to my journey in life? That we all have this unique journey. And then I think you're successful. Okay. The rest kind of takes care of itself. I think if you are true to those things, you'll pay your bills, you'll eat your meals, you'll live in a decent place, and your life will be okay. And so I don't think it's about the other stuff. And I think in that sense, awareness has been the number one quality that has enabled me to have whatever success I had.
I know that you're big in the, or just active in philanthropy as well. I always like to ask how people like to give back.
I think that's a very delicate question, and requires a very measured answer because I treasure my childhood of deprivation and how that inspired me, how it taught me that I'm going to get what I get, that I'm going to be depending upon myself and only myself. It taught me personal responsibility and accountability in a very profound way. And I think that charity and safety nets need to be very carefully constructed so that they don't undermine that in other people. God wants us all, I believe, to be our best and bring our best to every day. Charity and social safety nets can be constructed in ways that undermine that, and they would be counterproductive. And so I approach philanthropy very carefully because of that, very, very carefully. And I try to create involvements for myself that are inspirational for people, that give people lift offs, but don't give people safety nets. You understand?
Yeah, I do. I love that. Yeah, I appreciate you just highlighting that too. It helps me to even think through how we give or where, and that's interesting. I come from similar humble beginnings, and it's yeah, I it helped shape me in a big way as well. I'm so grateful for your time, grateful for just the depth of knowledge, experience, and your willingness to be so transparent just about your background, how that's shaped everything moving forward. And I love the focus on prayer. I'm just grateful for your just willingness to share. And how can the listeners learn more about you and find the Friday updates and even the Greatness is a Choice, your book as well?
I'm reworking with my team my website. And so I will have a website. It may be ethanpenner.com, but it's not up yet, where everything will be centrally located. For now, there's a website called greatintersection.com. And that's a place where you could find information about my book and this Friday 5. That'll ultimately be folded into the ethanpenner.com website. There's a company called Mosaic, which is my most recent investment company, mosaicrei.com. And you could go there and find things about what I've been doing professionally. I have a new business that I've just become chairman of that I'll mention. Is chairman of Hill Street Realty, which is a 23-year-old company founded and run by my younger brother, Joe. And I'm chairman of that business. And fittingly, it's a multifamily acquisition and management company. And so that's, putting my feet where my mouth is and my heart is, and investing with my time and my money where I believe it makes sense. And so that's my primary kind of real estate involvement today. I have a few others that are less primary, but that's primarily it. I think I'm reachable. I'm very easy to find, and I enjoy interacting with people and getting feedback and learning from people. So you'll see if you get my Friday 5, you could, people start email conversations with me on some of them, and I love doing that, and it's fun to have that back and forth and learn.
Awesome. That's a wrap, Ethan. That's the end of the show.